No matter how good of a writer you are, it isn't a story until there's conflict. Hundreds of sci-fi stories include some futuristic war for our intrepid main characters to fight their way through, defeating the clearly evil person or alien without much regard for how many other background characters die for the cause on either side. In real life, war is often only something the average person sees on the news, but for those involved directly, it's a scarring, traumatic hell. People die in real-life wars. People just as important in the story of their lives as we are to our own, no matter what side they fought for, and this horrid truth has led towards significant changes in how we battle. The minigun was actually invented by a field doctor in order to make death by rifle shot more humane, as the rifles of the time were incredibly inaccurate and would often lead to initially non-lethal shots that would then get infected on the harsh lands of the battlefield. Soldiers were dying more often to germs than the enemy, a long and painful process that only ever ended in death, as opposed to a relatively quick death by gunshot. Weapons became better suited to killing accurately and quickly, and in the case of explosives, better at killing as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Something that culminated in the creation of atomic weapons, literal extinction engines. Use too many and the sun vanishes, your body rots away, and the land becomes infertile for thousands of years. This seemingly penultimate method of mass destruction changed how wars were not only fought, but started. All of a sudden, every major power on Earth had access to a gun that not only totally destroyed the enemy, but poisoned the planet for millennia. They had to be careful about who they picked fights with, especially if that country had a treaty with one that owned such weapons. So, wars turned mostly to cyberspace, as attacks on information and systems could cripple a country just as well as a nuke could, but without threat of retaliation until the enemy developed a new kind of cyber bomb. All of this illustrates an apparent move towards both a higher capacity for inflicting casualties while reducing the death toll on your own patriots. Indeed, some bombers are completely unmanned, with all those involved in the attack looking on from computer screens halfway across the world. Wars are still very much present on current-day Earth, and may continue to be so in the future. Personally, I would like to believe that such massive conflicts will not continue at the pace they currently do, let alone the pace of the past. But as I like to say, those who theorize about the future are often completely wrong, whether it be for the good or for the bad. So, worst case scenario, humanity continues to find reasons to kill each other over. What could these battles look like on or around other worlds once we have reached them? What vehicles could be used? What would we be fighting over? What weapons are feasible, and what could we possibly do to defend ourselves against them? Welcome back to Serious Science, and this is the science behind space battles. Apologies if my intro has left a bad taste in your mouth, but I wanted to start by impressing what wars truly end with: lots of dead human beings, and those they left behind now being declared winners. Real people die in these, and I will not produce a video talking about all the exciting ways we could blow up the bad guys while looking cool in space. I want to talk about what conflicts could realistically look like if we follow this trend towards both mass destruction and life preservation, while also acknowledging how devastating that destruction could be to both entire worlds and entire populations. So, to begin, exactly how far forwards will I look? There may be a day when wars are fought entirely in the digital universe, with only mechanical casualties, or even abolished entirely for another more proven method of negotiation, so I won't look too far into the future, only towards our initial and middle stages of planetary expansion. Where would these future wars take place? While we like to discuss planetary terraformation in science fiction, it is rarely an exact representation of just how much time and continuous effort goes into this process. It takes hundreds of thousands, even millions of years to fully terraform a world into something that even resembles Earth, and a constant upkeep by millions of ships either delivering matter or offloading choking gases collected from the poisonous atmosphere. If a planet lacks an active interior core, it will also lack a magnetic field needed to protect the planet from the absolutely deadly radiation our star sends out in every direction. And one will need to be engineered if we want to sustain an atmosphere, either by launching a protective shield between the planet and the star, or by setting up magnetic field generators on or under the surface. All of this illustrates the delicate nature of terraforming a dead rock into a life-sustaining world, and I believe anyone not hell-bent on the destruction of such planets will want to leave these Edens as untouched as possible. Conflicts over these planets may be fought in the vacuum of space or on uninhabitable moons, but never down on the worlds themselves, as this will wreck the process of change and may leave you with a far deadlier rock than what was originally found. On the other hand, the human spirit, along with its vices, hasn't changed at the same rate as our technological progress, and the phrase "if I can't have it, then no one will" still lives on today. If an enemy invading such eventual paradises is beginning to fail, they may enact a last gasp of destruction as a mighty show of spite, and ruin the world for everyone. Let's begin by talking about possibly the most uninteresting theater of war, on the surfaces of planets. Again, probably no nuking on the worlds you're currently changing, unless of course constant nuking of that world was part of the heating process. So if foot soldiers were sent in at all, it would most likely be for smaller missions meant for infiltration or securing prisoners. Small battles may take place using swarms of robotic drones controlled from ships in orbit, or in bunkers on the defending side. This would ensure that no casualties occur other than our iron killers, leaving the attackers with plenty of time to flee if their armies were defeated. But then again, why land anything on a world at all if a force already has complete control over that world? Your soldiers will be armed with whatever weaponry was light and cheap enough to pack on board a ship that needed as much weight trimmed from its frame to fly. The other side has entire industrial zones capable of producing near infinite ammunition for their ground-based orbital defenses to blast you with incredibly heavy munitions from. Any space-based invading force will not just be fighting other ships, but a planet of them. Worlds in the infant stages of colonization may be taken out easily and replaced with a troop of your own to begin the process, but planets with established owners will be far more difficult to take on. Though one possibility for surface combat may be when two factions both begin a colonization effort and turn on each other near the end stage, or even one faction splitting into two on a disagreement of how that planet will be settled. These ground-based wars may look quite similar to the ones of today, and may possibly use existing or improved vehicles to do so, though possibly with more automation and less human interaction. In terms of improving our land crafts, we may not notice much more than additional armors and prismatic deflection that could block several light-based wavelengths that would make them or their emissions visible to the enemy, much like how all of you watching can make an improvement to your lives by subscribing. Was that a good integration? Anyways, we may see more of an arsenal mounted to these vehicles to be used in long-distance attacks. If the planet has an atmosphere, hypersonic aircraft could drop ordnance from miles above a target and be hundreds of miles away by the time they land. But what about the staple of success for sci-fi? Space battles. Whether it be from within an orbit, around a planet, or deep in space, the only difference between the two is where the wreckage will land. While some people like to point out that there is no such thing as zero gravity due to yourself or the ship being influenced by a gravitational body, this makes little relative difference to the people inside an orbiting or cruising ship, as to them and their crafts they are experiencing no apparent downwards pull. This limits the capabilities of our ships as well as how combat will occur. Whether a ship is orbiting a planet or traveling through space, it will be traveling at massive speeds, anywhere from miles per second to thousands of miles per second. This makes targeting these ships extremely difficult if your ship is not also traveling at these speeds and is doing so on an intercepting course. This also makes the act of changing course an energy-intensive and lengthy procedure, as in order to stop moving in one direction while traveling several miles a second, you will need to burn enough fuel to not only stop yourself from traveling in that direction entirely, but also expending the exact same amount of fuel to accelerate in a new direction. But we already have similar battling techniques here on Earth with aerial dogfights. Our jets have gotten faster, better at turning, and more capable of carrying large weapons now than ever before, and they fire these weapons at one another while pushing speeds close to or above the speed of sound, all while dodging around one another in the more maneuver-hospitable environment that is the atmosphere. They also use weapons we may see in space, target-locking missiles. These weapons can individually acquire a target and chase them down no matter what the target speed is relative to the firing craft, as long as the target is somehow not faster than that missile, something that may be seen in space. Space dogfights will also look vastly different than those held in atmospheres, as the air needed to bank off of and change the direction of our crafts is no longer present, leaving all course corrections to thrusters which use fuel that can now run out. Most of you who have ever played such games as Star Citizen or No Man's Sky know this difficulty, as a ship that is attacking you can dodge all around your craft, all while keeping their weapons aimed squarely at you and firing at all times. Now a ship can face whatever direction it wants while traveling in any direction direction they choose, as now there is no atmosphere to drag their noses down or put your craft into a spin due to intense turns or aerial forces. This changes how our craft can maneuver drastically, as you can aim at anything, no matter the direction you are traveling. If someone is on your tail, you can simply flip around and fire at them, instead of needing to somehow get behind them to escape their guns. While the ability to maneuver in more defensive ways is increased in space, it also requires that your ship comes equipped with many powerful thrusters on nearly every hull surface, in order to change your direction of motion in a variety of ways that will need to be quick and responsive to execute. While space fighting games are often seen as complete fantasies, they can offer a glimpse at what space combat could look like, as they often use math similar to the equations used to calculate how bodies would interact and move through a zero-gravity environment. These games are also inaccurate in several ways, such as how damage affects your ship, as machines rarely just continue to function after a large portion of their mechanics have been atomized. Impacts from small arms and missiles causes much more damage than these simulations portray, and will often completely disable something as fragile as a wartime spacecraft. After all, the inclusion of redundant systems and thick armors to protect from attacks makes little sense to include on a ship you want to keep as light and maneuverable as possible. There's a reason that new players to such games will often stay completely still while turning to fire upon attackers, as it's extremely difficult to land shots if you are also moving with respect to the enemy. While this makes you a greater target, it also grants more time to fire on other ships, which will be one of the only strategies larger ships will be able to enact. So, what does all of this look like? Well, let's start with an orbital scenario. Whether an attacking force will be meeting an existing orbital defense system or rendezvousing with an enemy fleet around a planet, the attacks will look similar. First of all, if two forces will want to attack each other using crafts, they will need to enter an orbit similar to that of the enemy in order to reduce the relative speeds between the two. But here we will also run into the same problem we face today after the introduction of nuclear weapons, that being that they exist and kill pretty much everyone in a multi-mile wide radius. Why would we ever deploy either manned or robotic ships that could be destroyed and are costly to construct if they have a distance to cover before they encounter the enemy? A distance that can be mined and aimed at to absolutely pummel anything that passes through this new stellar no man's land. Why not lob extremely destructive ordnance towards the enemy fleet from a distance possibly measured in millions of miles, using weapons that have no drop-off and will not slow down while traveling towards their targets? In fact, these weapons could come equipped with rockets to speed themselves up during their flight time, and land traveling hundreds of thousands of miles per second, multiple percentages of the speed of light. These impacts, even if what caused them failed to detonate, would arrive with enough force to act as a small thermonuclear device, absolutely wrecking anything that wasn't a solid ball of antimony. If one-on-one combat is initiated, either for the reason of both sides not wanting their entire orbital fleets destroyed, or if the planet below would react poorly to missed shots falling down on it, our larger ships may stay far from the action to act as launching platforms for these ships, as well as repair stations and medical facilities. They would dictate the action far from it, while still remaining to pick up the fleeing fleets or victorious pilots. But what about ship battles that occur in deep space with no planets to hide behind? The battlefield changes drastically as planets also act as massive objects to swing around and change direction without using fuel. Two fleets are approaching each other. One has left from the orbit of a planet, the others want to invade, and the other side is approaching this planet from interstellar space. Both fleets are traveling towards one another at many thousands of miles per second, with a closing speed between the two of almost 2% of light. This will lead to each fleet slowing down to engage one another directly, firing at one another from large distances, or waiting to engage as soon as the enemy fleet comes into targeting range, something that may have a window of only a fraction of a second as the two whiz past. In the case of launching ordnance towards one another, these will only impact slightly before the window of attack closes, ending with both fleets showered in hydrogen bombs over the course of a millisecond, blasting dangerous hypersonic debris in either direction of travel that could act as a wall of death for any non-combatant ships passing along these directions of travel. This debris cloud could also shower the planet one fleet left from in a sudden metallic heat storm that could boil off a significant portion of the atmosphere if the fleet did not change direction after leaving this planet. But if ordnance is launched from a distance before the two fleets cross each other, it will give each fleet enough time to either dodge these projectiles or aim secondary weapons at them to destroy them before they impact. If the two fleets slow their relative speed to engage each other directly, it will look more like how orbital engagements occur. But if the two did not reduce speed and instead waited for that fraction of a second of engagement to unload every weapon they had at one another, they would annihilate large portions of one another in an instant, leading to another instance of our previously mentioned wall of hypersonic debris, which may also make attacking a world from the same angle at a later date impossible, as the attacking fleet would now have to defend against the additional hazard of the remains of their previous fleet. How would we defend against a wall of atom bombs being released in time frames too fast for the human mind to react? Well, if we entrusted targeting to computers that can process data far faster than we can, they could use onboard ablative lasers to either redirect or destroy incoming projectiles before they found a home in your delicate and quite expensive fleet. Then again, your fleet responsible for such short and destructive encounters may be entirely staffed by robotic AIs in order to reduce human casualties. And yes, while I do believe that someday computers will be able to imitate intelligent minds to the point where we would be hard-pressed to find a difference, I don't think anyone but the most evil mustache twirler would put fully sentient computers in their warships to fight and die for their more worthy fleshy creators. These fighting AI would need little more than the intelligence of a rodent in order to carry out their functions, and additional complexity may lead to problems of free choice when battles occur. Two robot fleets both agreeing to save themselves and let their masters fight their own wars while they go off and create a robot utopia is far less likely if neither of them could even comprehend themselves as being individual entities, let alone ones capable of free choice. There's an interesting episode of the original Star Trek that shows a war entirely fought by AI, where fake projections of attacks and casualties are reported to one another, while all those who would have been affected by the fake blasts report to camps in order to be peacefully euthanized. While this situation is a precursory glance at what these artificial wars could look like, I doubt the entirety of a population on either side of the war would agree to such an equally meaningless death no matter what their computers told them, leaving the casualties as simply numbers and not actual dead loved ones. But what would a war fought entirely by computers actually look like? Say we had too many lives and valuable resources at stake for an actual destructive conflict to take place. Well, I doubt anyone but those who have been the best of allies for many years that are suddenly turned against one another would use such mutually trusting methods as completely fake and non-destructive artificial AI warring. What would actual cyber attacks look like in the future? We use computers for pretty much everything, from power distribution to banking and land ownership records. If even one of these important systems were to be impaired or possibly destroyed completely, they would tear down necessary systems that make life on other worlds possible. If power plants were attacked by viruses that tell the computers to shut down or enact a destructive procedure to disable these plants permanently, power could be lost across entire continents, leaving your victims in the literal dark about any physical attacks you send their way. Banking records could be erased, causing entire economies to collapse, or communications could be filled with misinformation that confuses and weakens targets. Digital attacks may be just as destructive to infrastructure as a bomb dropped on a city, and may even lead to similar casualties if a population is without the means to operate their colonies. So, the future of warfare looks to be an even more destructive field, with ships carrying enough weapons to now kill planets instead of cities. We will also have many decades of weaponry improvements to now hurl at one another, but the destructiveness of these weapons makes little difference, as even a mortar shell fired with enough speed at a target in space will still do damage just as much as a rocket-guided tungsten spike will. While I also hope that such battles will never take place, it doesn't hurt to be ready for such things in order to protect yourself and your citizens. The future of warfare in space is an uncertain one, but one thing is for sure. If it ever happens, the glamour of such battles will quickly fall, and billions could be affected. We will just have to wait and see. And while we are waiting, we could spend that time improving the lives of all humans, no matter what world they call home, and reducing the chances of such conflicts arising. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you very much for watching.